launch of Sue in this room in November last year, and we've been really kind of overwhelmed by the number of parents that have been contacting us since that meeting. My name's Penny Lewis. I'm not your chair for this evening. Your chair for this evening is stuck in a car somewhere in a traffic jam. Linda, and she will be taking over, so this will be chairing by relay, hopefully, when she arrives. So forgive me if my description of the speakers is a little bit clunky, because I didn't read my invitation very carefully. Okay, so we've got a brilliant lineup and we've got a great audience, so this should be a really good, fruitful discussion talking about how we go forward, and also talking about sort of questions. It's an opportunity for you to raise questions. We assume that there may be some people in the audience that are critical of the basic tenet of the Scottish Union for Education. So we're open to all kinds of discussion. We've got some great speakers who are going to speak for about 5 or 6 minutes to start off the discussion. And we're going to start with Stuart Baird. Stuart Baird is a secondary school teacher in this area, and he is really interested in the idea of re-establishing the idea of teachers as specialists within their subject area. Not generalists, but specialists within their subject area. He's a secondary school teacher. And then the next speaker is Malcolm. Malcolm's appeared on our Substack, and you probably know Malcolm already because he's got a very high profile on social media. He's an Emmy-nominated TV producer, and he's co-founder and research lead for the GB Alliance. Who's
LGB.
Yeah. LGB yeah. Alliance. So, yeah, sorry.
So many letters. Don't add any more.
LGB Alliance, which has been at the forefront of trying to initiate a useful and serious discussion around the trans issue. The next speaker is Peggy Piper, and Peggy is a GP and parent of 2 primary school children, and she has, in the last year or so, really found that she's had her eyes open, like many of us have, as to the kind of sexualising material that's being promoted in primary schools at the present period of time. Now, I imagine that's why quite a few of you are here this evening. And finally, we have Dr. Stuart Wayton at the end, and Stuart is the chairperson of the Scottish Union for Education, and you've probably seen him on social media or on our Substack in the past. So, without any further delay, we'll start with Stuart. Thank you, Stuart.
All right, thank you very much. I've got my notes so I stay on track and I don't give any silly anecdotes like I might do in the classroom. Good evening, I'm Stuart Baird, a rather general issue secondary school teacher of many years. Teaching is a fantastic profession. Education, as the aim of what goes on in the classroom, is a noble goal. Teachers are in a privileged position of responsibility for the pupils they work with and the communities that they serve. Within schools, teachers are an authority, a representative of the adult world, and an expert in the subjects they teach. Those subjects are to introduce our young people to the adult world. Beyond the classroom, the pupil and the subject, schools have always had some sort of contemporary instrumental purpose. From the development of individual virtue in the Greek city-states to the basic needs of an industrial workforce. A key focus for Scotland's Curriculum for Excellence has been the employability of young people, from skills to work to developing the young workforce, all aiming to ensure that they are ready for work. Indeed, there is a renewed focus on using schools to support the skills that, it is believed, support economic growth. More recently, since 2015, schools have been tasked with closing the attainment gap completely, overcoming the effects of poverty, a goal that was the government were to be judged on. A new funding source was provided, standardised assessment created, and evaluation reports produced. Economic success and negating the impact of poverty are not, though, the only issues that schools have been tasked with today. Since the inception of Curriculum for Excellence, schools have been an increasing focus for initiatives tackling a range of issues, and the Scottish Government has a network of actors supporting one another as they push these agendas into our schools. often with little public support. An early curriculum for excellence example is Learning for Sustainability, described as a cross-curricular approach which enables learners, educators, schools and their wider communities to build a socially just, sustainable and equitable society. Identified as an entitlement for all learners, its political cause is to support Scotland's climate change targets and commitment to become a net zero nation. Particularly grand. More recently, a new form of race equality and anti-racism has been established in Scotland. An example of this initiative was seen this month with the Scottish Council of Deans of Education producing a framework for initial teacher education that seeks to understand the impact of whiteness and recognises that racial identity is an important way for students to define themselves, connect with one another and organise on behalf of shared interests. Not what I would have remembered from my anti-racism work. And the list of initiatives and agendas goes on, produced by an education system controlled from the centre and supported by local acolytes. Schools moving from being places to learn how to think to being places where you are told what to think. An issue that has been raised before in regards to the Curriculum for Excellence. Missing from the discussion around schools today is the subjects. In the recent interim report on qualifications and assessment, the role of subjects was given an uninspiring entry. Indeed, it could be read as a barrier to more novel forms of education involving interdisciplinary learning or personal experiences. A similar sense can be found in the recent national report on the National Discussion on Education. The word subject was mentioned 28 times across the 93 pages, without any meaningful explanation or clear support of what it meant. The place of subjects is being usurped by a model of education that puts competency, skills and outlooks to the fore. Subjects have not been the organising principle of schools by chance, a leftover from an embarrassing age of the past. Through them, we as adults offer to our young people the best that has been thought and said in the world, as educationalist Matthew Arnold said. They build towers of imagination to allow our young people to see beyond their immediate community. The subjects also represent a social bond between our pupils and the adult world, an intergenerational discussion between the past and the future. Through them, we allow our young people to critically examine the world we live in. We are, though, faced with a system that debases education, seeing it as an arena for policies and agendas that have not been tested in the realm of adults, of politics, of democracy, and which disconnects pupils from their social inheritance, which is the subjects. The Scottish Union for Education stands up for subjects, the knowledge and the social connections they provide, and challenges those that want to use schools for their own political ends. For parents, that means supporting teachers in delivering those subjects. But today, it also means questioning the initiatives and agendas that look to indoctrinate and not educate. Thank you.
Want to stand up or? Okay. Very formal here. Oh, I see. Oh, well, that's why. That makes sense then. And I put it in here, do I? I should consult my notes there. Well, it's great to see so many people here. When I was invited, I thought, I bet there's only going to be half a dozen people there. Because new organisations on this subject are so hard to get going. And I remember when we had our first meeting, in fact, first public meeting period was in Glasgow at the Oran Moor, and LGB Alliance had its first meeting there. And right up until 5 minutes before, there was just a half a dozen people, and we thought, oh my goodness, we might as well give up. And then suddenly people all came in. And but the difference is, that was 3 years ago in January, and we were genuinely worried about pickets and violence, and there were threats that, you know, they didn't know, the other side didn't know where we were meeting, but they knew there was a meeting. And we had extra security, and you know, everybody was worried that somebody's going to get beaten up or whatever. We better get taxis to take people home in case they get attacked. Now nothing like that happens, and I don't think, I mean, there was no protesters here tonight, and there was no sense of fear or anything, so I think that's an indication of how things have really changed. Why did we set up LGB Alliance? Well, I suppose over the years, it was becoming clear that the so-called LGBT or LGBTQ, etc., movement was asking for stranger and stranger things. And we felt it was time to say, look, not in our name. One of the important things, we call it the H-bomb, we realized that any time anybody criticized anything about trans rights or trans demands or stuff in education that we're talking about, they'd shout not only transphobe, which has a powerful effect, that word, but if they can say homophobe as well, then that gives them a much bigger purchase, because everyone thinks, well done the gay movement, they got their rights, pat on the back. That's a good example of a successful civil rights movement, the gay rights movement. So if the other side can shout at you and say you're a homophobe as well, then that's a double whammy. So we felt it was important to stand up and say, no, they're not homophobes. And that really, we've noticed how it chips away at their argument. If we can say, or if you can say, look, not all gay people agree with you, not all gay people agree with putting these books in schools, it really cripples their argument. So that's why we were set up. I mean, obviously there was a huge amount of opposition. It wasn't really in schools that we were mainly focused when we set up. It was mainly the huge numbers of girls that were identifying as male, or boys or whatever, in schools and elsewhere. That you'll know that it's like 4,400% increase in 10 years, that famous piece in the Times. And it was two lesbians who founded the organisation, and we could tell something was wrong, and I think that's how everybody comes to this argument, is they don't quite know what it is, but they know there's something not quite right, and they knew there was something wrong. There's no way that suddenly, within a decade, thousands of girls suddenly deciding that they're boys without something going on. That was why we were set up. We then realised, as we did more and more research, that of course we suddenly realised, because we're all a bit older, that this was an old argument in a new form. Because when the gay rights movement was set up, there was always tension between, if you like, the radicals that want to destroy society. There was a whole bunch of gay rights activists who thought, bizarre as it may sound, that gay rights was going to help destroy capitalism and brought in colonialism and every other social evil through gay rights. I've never understood quite how they thought that was going to work, but that was their agenda. Whereas the bulk of the gay rights movement was just about equality, let me live my life, get and do whatever I want, and no prejudice or bigotry in the workplace. And in the end, the good guys, if you like, the moderates won, and we dominated the gay rights movement, which is why society said, sure, on you go, we'll help you and you can have all the rights you want. Once that happened, most of the people in the gay rights movement went off for a drink and went home and lived their life, bought a dog and all the rest of it, all the things that everybody does. And then that allowed this opportunity for these hollowed out, pointless organisations like Stonewall, which had no purpose anymore, to be filled with the people who we'd been fighting with in the 60s and 70s, the radicals who want to smash society. I always say to people, it's easy to think, of course, a lot of them are absolutely nuts, these activists. But I say it's not only the gay rights movement that has these two poles, if you like. I mean, I have lots of socialist friends. There are good, socialists who just want to ameliorate working conditions and, increase wages. And then there's absolute fruitcakes who want to, revolution in the street, and they can't wait for the tanks to be brought in. And you have the green movement where, you've got the World Wildlife Fund that wants to save the panda, and you've got absolute nut jobs that want to, that just poured paint over a Monet in a gallery today. And so I think that's the same. There's a respectable mainstream gay movement, and then there's a bunch of nut jobs. It's a common problem, but we want to help root out the nut jobbery. What I'd say about the schools thing is, I think the schools thing is a little bit like, You know when, I mean, Glasgow's a good example. There was a huge social problem 40, 50, 60 years ago, overcrowding. So what do the Labour governments and the Labour councils do? They say, right, let's smash the place down, build high-rise blocks and have motorways everywhere. They were trying to solve a problem which we now know was the wrong problem. They should have just had better quality housing and saved the tenements and sorted it out. Equally, the desire among a lot of these people to, you know, have sexually explicit or gay rights material in schools is because they're thinking we live in the 1950s or the 1960s, where you're not allowed to mention homosexuality or you know, there's huge prejudice against gay people. That's an old problem, and it doesn't exist anymore. And so this nonsense that there's some necessity to have materials about gay rights or let's celebrate pride in schools, it's no longer necessary to do that because kids have access to the internet and television where you can't move, but there's gay characters in every single soap opera, there's gay presenters, there's gay MPs, we've got the gayest parliament in the whole world in Edinburgh. So it's this, and I think we've got to say to people, we've got to say, what is the burning need? Because there isn't a burning need. So if there's not a burning need, then it's something else. And I think what it's about is they think the agenda needs to be validated. You know, the schools have to give their sort of imprimatur. They have to, you know, sort of show that this is a respectable, worthy set of sort of teaching materials. And that's, once you get to the point where you can say, the only reason you want this in schools is we've to validate it, then you can start having an argument about, well, I'm not going to validate this, and I'm not going to validate, you know, girls getting choked and sexually explicit material. You can have those questions. I mean, just to sum up, I would say that what we've learned more than anything over the last 3 years is you don't have to have all the answers. When they say, you know, define biological sex, I say, well, wait a minute, I've got to get my dictionary out. You don't need to do that. We just have to ask the questions. Because when we ask the questions and we start the debate, their arguments fall apart. And so, I mean, I think that's, if there's anything I would say, you know, schools materials, I want to know who wrote that book, 1,000 Dresses. Turns out it's just some nut job in America, some Californian lunatic he's not an educationalist, he's not an educational psychologist, he's not an expert on anything. And he writes a book about 1,000 Dresses, and it's now being taught to every kid in Scottish schools. We just got to ask the questions and make them answer, and I bet you they don't have any. Thanks.
What's that, sir?
This one.
I'm using that one.
Okay, hi. I'm a mother of 2 primary-age boys and a GP. I first became aware of the LGBT content in primary schools really during the pandemic. So during homeschooling and the LGBT month, my child had mostly LGBT content other than his probably maths and his kind of words. And also the school received the LGBT Bronze Award during the pandemic. At that time, I began to have conversations with friends who shared similar concerns about how ideology was being taught as fact. I learnt a book had been read to a P3 class called Who Are You? The Kid's Guide to Gender Identity, which mentions when babies are born, people ask, is it a girl or a boy? Babies can't talk, so grown-ups make a guess by looking at their bodies. This is sex assigned at birth, male or female. Also mentions some people say there are 2 genders, but there are really many. And this book was removed after 2 parents met with the school, and it was found to be inappropriate. In 2021, I was a busy mother, carer, and a GP, so unfortunately took my finger off the pulse because they were the bigger priorities. Well, not bigger priorities, just my life was pressing priorities, yeah. And then I was quite concerned when my P5 came home saying that he'd learnt about wet dreams. By that stage, the curriculum had been completed for the year. In 2022, I spent time reviewing the slides and was pretty concerned about the sexualised content of the slides, such as the slide, how people have sex, what do they do? So it says when women feel like having sex with when a woman feels like having sex with her partner, her vulva and vagina might feel tingly, wet and slippery to touch, and it described orgasms. So we withdrew our child and taught him what was age appropriate. I felt quite well equipped as a mother and a GP to do that. Also named the body parts, which shows the female genitalia in the straddle position. These are P5 with pubic hair, and it mentions the clitoris as a sexual organ. So it came to my attention this year through my son, who's in P5, and we'd withdrawn both sons this year, that several children have been upset during a lesson, some crying. Name the body parts. That was a lesson, name the body parts. So we got talking as parents, and we set up a WhatsApp group for like-minded parents within the school, and it felt like a safe place to share concerns and also share knowledge with each other. And more people started removing their children from RSHP. Just, we'd lost really trust in what was being taught, and we wanted to protect our children. But we discovered many things within the group, and these are comments that myself and other parents wanted me to share tonight. So the book, Who Are You?, had been read to several classes, not that one mentioned at the beginning. A boy had been persuaded by a classmate after an RSHP lesson to look up vagina examination on his mobile phone at home. His mother only discovered it, she had put parental controls on the phone. Unfortunately, just a line drawing had come up. After a discussion on non-binary and a book on genderology had been read to a class, several children in the class started changing their pronouns and identifying as non-binary. This was a lower primary class, and a child was corrected by the teacher for not using they instead of she. Another boy in the same topic was read to the same class. After the book had been read to the same class, like a little girl was asked by her pals if she was non-binary because she played football and didn't wear dresses very much. But until then, there had been no mention of it within that class. And a teenage graphic novel, Heartstopper, was in the class library. Several parents, including me, complained about it, and the book was removed because it was inappropriate. We discovered what children had been saying to their parents. So a little girl said, "Mummy," she didn't like learning about wet dreams. And Mum said, "Mummy, when I wore pink, played with girls and liked playing with My Little Ponies, was I non-binary?" A boy said a lesson about puberty. Female puberty was horrible, and he hated doing an experiment on tampons with the whole class. And a boy said, "Do you know that women can have babies and turn into men, magically thinking that they just change like a caterpillar into a butterfly or like a chameleon?" A boy had been upset during the name the body parts. A boy that had been upset told his mum that he felt uncomfortable, found it disturbing, disgusting, and didn't feel safe learning about it. And a boy after the same lesson said it was disgusting, I felt sick. And that mum had only been prompted to ask her son after I'd mentioned that children had been upset, so she wouldn't have known about it had I not mentioned it. And also a girl commented that, about the children that were suddenly identifying as non-binary. This is like a P4 child. It's just like a trend, like bringing a new toy into class and everyone's got it the next day. So these comments, I believe, show that RSHP lessons can cause curiosity that can result in inappropriate exposure if parental controls, aren't used on phones. Some content of RSHP is not age appropriate because it's upsetting children. And children do not understand what they are being taught, so it's not age appropriate. So as a result of the activism and ideologies being promoted by governments, councils and schools, I talk to my children and ask them to be vigilant about what they're being taught, and to question things. And now I would say my children are pretty discerning. One of my oldest boy told me a book had been placed in their school library that he didn't think I would approve of, called Puberty and Growing Up. Bearing in mind I'd taken my boy out of RSHP, and it mentioned being turned on and what an orgasms are. So we weren't happy that RSHP content had spilled into the classroom. My children were being exposed to it. But he was discerning enough not to read it and to tell me about it. So I complained to the new acting head that had come in, and he validated my concerns. The book was removed, and he organised he suggested an RSHP workshop open to all parents in the school, just to kind of go through the curriculum, and which was, it felt quite liberating because we could all raise our concerns about it. So we learnt there that we had been told that we could only, prior to that we could only remove our children from some lessons because there were so many kids being taken out. But he had told us that we can remove children from all RSHP lessons, and that it should be adapted to the maturity of the class, and that schools don't have to follow the RSHP curriculum, so they can opt out as a school. So I think as a parent group we've become bolder. I think being open about our concerns and our thoughts within the school parent group, I would say, kind of slowly, I would say. I'm concerned that we've spent decades teaching boys that they can do ballet and wear pink, and girls can play football, climb trees, but trans ideology can make them question their sex by stating that their gender identity doesn't match their biological sex, or using the ideological term sex assigned at birth, and that schools are following an affirmative approach regarding trans ideology, also about the indoctrination of LGBT content in the school curriculum, such as the LGBT Youth Scotland Award system and the TIE training for teachers, and that's also concerned for that children who believe sex is binary won't have the freedom in schools to express their beliefs without being called transphobic, bullied or excluded from their groups or for their beliefs. And I'm also concerned about the sexualised content of RSHP taking away children's innocence, as a law isn't age appropriate. So I feel we want to protect our children's innocence, and we have rights as parents to bring them up within our moral framework. The Children in Scotland Act 1B states that parents have a right to direct their children's upbringing, so we have a right to determine what's harmful in relation to their education and protect them from that. Like, we know our children best. They trust us to protect them from what's harmful at home, at school, wherever they are. So we have to speak to them about what they're being taught at school, what they're talking to their children about, and speak to other parents and our friends, and also speak to the schools when we're not concerned, and keep speaking, keep emailing till they reply, because there's strength in numbers. So let our kids be kids, because they only have one chance. Sorry.
There are some seats down the front for those of us.
Yeah, and to the side there as well. What's it like at the back for hearing? Is the acoustics okay? Okay, I feel like shouting anyway, so I might shout. This is part of what we're doing today, and I'm delighted to see so many people here, but part of what we're doing is we're promoting this pamphlet. And Jenny Cunningham wrote the pamphlet, who's at the back. So if people have any specific questions about it and on the transgender question, feel free to raise them. We've also got Kate Deemings here somewhere. Oh, there she is, our American friend, which I don't know if she knows this yet, but me and her are going to help set up a parent support group online, because I think we need to build a national movement of parents. Right. And I think you can't underestimate how important parents and grandparents are, because without people like yourselves, nothing is going to change, and you have to take yourself very seriously, I think, and bear that in mind. That's not my talk, by the way, so I'm starting now. I'm going to do throw in a bit of sociology, a bit of social history, or personal social history, and hopefully it'll make sense that this has got something to do with transgenderism. So here we go. For those of you who don't buy into the transgender idea, the whole thing seems insane. How can anyone be born in the wrong body? Isn't that a form of mysticism? Unsurprisingly, conspiracy theories have developed to explain this madness. But there's a long history to the madness, one that you can trace back to the sex and gender specialists from the mid-20th century, something that Malcolm Clark has done brilliantly in his Substack. I was saying to Malcolm, and this is true, his is the only other Substack. No, that's not true. I have 2 other Substacks I subscribe to, and his is one of them, because it's very good, and he's also very funny, which always helps. Malcolm's got to leave at 7:45, by the way, because he's got a flight. So when we're done, if you've got any specific questions for Malcolm, get into it. However, as well as the sex and gender history, there's a longer and arguably more difficult history to grasp when thinking about the transgender trend that often has little or nothing to do with sex or gender. It comes in various names, like the century of the self, or the culture of narcissism, or in a more recent book entitled From Self to Selfie. I'd struggle to do justice to any of these ideas, but the titles, I hope, give a sense of what the problem is. And it's a big problem because it's a problem of our culture, a culture that affects all of us to one degree or another, a culture where in its most abstract or pure form there is literally nothing beyond the self. If you want to push the abstraction, you could argue that in fact we are all transgender. We just don't realize it yet. Or perhaps more realistically, we're all selfies, individuals who are constantly being encouraged to look ever inwards, to understand who we are, to find this magical thing called our identity. I was thinking the other day about history and the importance of history and the importance of our histories as individuals. And I was thinking one of the things that SUE, the Scottish Union for Education, could do would be to tap into the parents and grandparents who contact us and to get them to think about their past and about the adults, especially the teachers, who inspired them. Something or someone who had values that, when we think about it, helped to make us who we are. I've often asked my students to name someone they would call a hero, and I've got the answer, rather depressingly, I always thought, more than any other, was they would say, my mother. Not that I don't like mothers, but there are billions of people, past and present, to choose from, and all I would get, as an example of my hero, would be my mother. A sign of the times, I think. Well, I'm now going to describe not someone I would call a hero, but I am going to talk about my mother. My mother, who is now lying in bed with back cancer, was and is what could be described as a stoic. She clearly had not been educated in the ways of self-esteem, and was the sort of person that when I came home from school and said I came second in the class, would say, "Why didn't you come first?" She was always a bit annoying and still is. But I doubt if my mother ever wondered about her identity. Daughter of a shipbuilder who told her to get a job as soon as she left school. She left school with no qualifications, got married and had 2 children. When she told my father that she wanted to become a teacher, he told her, "No wife of mine is going to work." To which she replied, "Well, you better get another wife." And that was the end of that conversation. My father died when I was 2. but my mother, in her words, just got on with it. Raised us, put herself through college, and after many years became a primary school teacher. Over the decades, she taught thousands of primary school kids and seems to know half the people in North Shields. After retiring, she felt she should give something back and became a magistrate of all things. And until very recently, was volunteering in one of the local art galleries. I don't know exactly where her stoicism and her hard work and her public sensibility came from. I have a fair idea, but one thing I do know is that it didn't simply come from herself. Despite being an atheist, I suspect that religious values of the past lingered on. And of course, there was the fact that her father, my grandfather, was a Labour man, a union man, and someone who refused promotions because he was one of us, not one of them, as he would have put it. I thought when I visited my mother next week, or when I visit her, I could perhaps read to her while she lies in bed. I suspect this won't happen. I'm actually horrified at the thought of it, strangely. You need to meet my mother. But if I did, I wondered about a book and thought about The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. In this book, Hemingway describes his writing as being like an iceberg, where he uses as few words as possible, like the tip of the iceberg, but gives us a huge picture. The best line in this book is this: "The old man had taught the boy to fish, and the boy loved him." That one line sums up what I think an adult should be to a child. It sums up what I think every teacher should aspire towards. It gives a sense of the importance of knowledge and experience, of time and effort, of hard work, and of the importance of passing all that on to the next generation, to a child who is both an individual, but more importantly, is an individual with roots. Adults and teachers need to stop affirming children and to start teaching them. They need to stop obsessing over their identity and start to develop their character. And the Scottish Union for Education needs an army of old men and old women, to make this happen. Then we will have a chance of stopping the transgender madness. I apologize.